Jannine Barron, welcome and thank you very much for joining me today. You're a writer, speaker, facilitator, business mentor, and you also had a TEDx talk about accessing intuition as a tool, which received over 40 million views. That's an amazing achievement, but I'm sure it's one of many throughout your life. And I would be very much interested to get to know you better. Maybe you can summarize a little bit what you're doing today. And yeah, we delve deeper into the questions that I've sent across, really.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's a beautiful invitation to be here. It's really, really great. Gosh, okay, so I'm almost 60. So how do I summarize what I do? Interesting. Um, I have this image in my mind, my younger me, and I'm a little girl, and I'm with all my neighborhood friends, and I'm pretending to be the teacher. That is my childhood game. And now in my life, I am a teacher. So I think what happened was I didn't set out to be a teacher. I didn't, but I came to a natural place in my life where I realized I'd developed a lot of good and bad experiences that gave me wisdom to now be a teacher and a mentor to people. And yes, intuition, you mentioned, that's been my guide my whole life. I've always trusted myself. It's very, very important. So, yes, I help business owners who want to make a big impact on the world in these times of a climate crisis. And I only work with people who want to make a positive planetary impact in business. So that's my specialty.
Okay, wonderful. And can we go back a little bit into your maybe childhood and teenage years? And can you tell me where you grew up and what was your childhood and teenage years like? It's always nice to kind of compare the previous times with current times and see what differences there are, maybe. So you can tell me a little bit if that's okay.
Okay. So this is I'm in Scotland, but I my accent is Australian, and I was brought up in a very small town in Australia that is now a big town. So when I grew up, there was very little going on. Most people were like white. It was the early multiculturalism in Australia, and of course there was Indigenous people. And slowly over the years, Australia has changed a lot. We've had a lot of migration, and now we have this beautiful multicultural society. But when I grew up, it was very much sheltered, English background, white people living in a small town in Australia, navigating the space. Um, it was a simple life. I was raised as a Catholic, so our whole life was revolved around the church and school and sport. And there was nothing dramatic or bad. It was a simple, loving life until I was 17, and then everything changed. So when I was 17, because I'd gone to school early, I went to university, and I discovered there was a whole other world. And this, what I thought was a simple, loving life, was full of complexity and uh, racism and sexism, and my country had treated Indigenous people abominably, and it was disgusting. And even the apartheid regime in South Africa had taken the laws from Australia to build apartheid. So it was like someone pulled off the curtains, and I discovered that the world was very different. So, and I've never looked back. So for the next 10 years, I immersed myself in human rights issues. Mm.
Okay, that's wonderful. How do you look at the landscape now and what's happening currently in the world? Because there's a lot of people try to see the differences between each other rather than finding common grounds. And there's a lot of kind of hate in different areas, whether this would be, as you mentioned, race or
Mm.
um, views on other things. What's your take on this? How drastically did it change? And do you think it can be solved in a way?
Yeah, I think it's up to every one of us to, against all odds, to focus on the positive and the good, and to use love as our springboard for healing. Because the reason there's so much pain is because we need healing. Our world is in pain. It's complex. You can't just go and end one war. The war is mixed up with famine and intersectionality and racism and supply chains and there's so many issues affecting each other that you cannot separate things. So our role as humans is to rise above and use love as the tool for healing, and we have to start with our healing ourselves, healing the land, and that is the most powerful thing. When we feel powerless, we always have ourselves in our own heart.
Okay. Do you think the technology destroyed the younger people or everyone now, and that's why we see each other at different levels? And do you think maybe elders, as I call them, could be the solution of making the change and improve things how they are in the world at the moment? Or is this a whole order and impossible to achieve, at least in the short term?
I don't think age makes you wise, but there are some wise people, and they tend to be older. But there's some very wise young people as well. I think you can be wise at any age. Um, I don't think technology is at fault at all. I think technology is an evolution. And, if you can imagine, even when the first piece of farming equipment allowed someone to not dig a hole anymore, that would have seemed radical at the time, in the same way that AI might seem radical to us. It's never what the technology is, it's how the humans are using it. So we are always the problem and we are always the solution. We created, yeah, a human created technology. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's rapidly moving into not necessarily a good direction, and it's a little bit scary at the same time. I mean, even
It's
with the
very scary,
artificial intelligence.
but look what you're doing. You're using technology for this with amazing purpose, where you want to help young people use access different content on the internet. You're the perfect example, Matt, of someone who is using the technology for good. So you are modeling this idea.
Thank you. Who are like the most important people in your life when you grow up, and how did they shape you as a person and who you are today? Were there any role models in your early days?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Do you know it's really interesting because before I mentioned human rights, when I must have been 15, and we had a history teacher, and he started at lunchtime this thing called Amnesty International. I'd never heard of it. And he said, you come along, and there's people who are political prisoners. He explained what they were. And he said, you can come and write letters in your lunch hour. So I went along and I did that. And, he opened up my world that for two things. One, that people in jail were not always the problem. Sometimes people could be jailed for things that were morally wrong. And secondly, that I had the power to do something about it. Like that was an incredible. I didn't know he was teaching me that at the time, but that's what he was. So he comes to mind, and I'm upset because I can't remember his name, but I can see his face. Beautiful, beautiful man. And also, he modeled masculinity different for me. So I'd never seen a man that was so gentle and caring. I grew up in a very men were a very particular way. Strong, loud, dominant. So he was very different, intellectual, soft. And then on the other side, I had a woman, my godmother, in fact, and she modeled that you didn't have to be married, that you could work, that you could travel the world. And all the other women I knew were mothers. It was like it was a destiny. This is, in the 1960s, 1970s, that your destiny would be to get married and have children. That was the greatest goal you could have. But she showed me, oh no, you can have this whole other life. So she was very powerful and he was very powerful. And there were many other people, but they're two that come to mind.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And if you could go back in time and relive a moment from your childhood or teenage years, what would that be?
Yes, there's some things in life you can never get back because they happen once. And the thing I think of is the first time you're in love or that you think you're in love. When you're a teenager and you're holding hands for the first time or you're kissing someone for the first time, the purity, the innocence and the delight and the way your whole body wakes up, you know, that only happens once. And I wish that everyone would have a good, positive experience of that. But yeah, the first time you like someone, it's an amazing, delicious thing.
Okay, wonderful. Let's move to career and education. What did you dream of becoming when you were younger, and how did it change over time, really? I mean, you're
Yeah,
very successful from what the internet tells and from what I've
yeah,
seen. Was that different goal when you were a child and you said, "Oh, I want to do this," but things and events suddenly changed
yeah.
it and you're happy about this?
Well, it's interesting because when I was a child, there was no internet. And so what would happen is we were given a book at school and it was called the Careers Handbook. And I was intrigued by this book. I would just read it for hours. There were professions I'd never heard of, and everything was mentioned. It was in alphabetical order, and it would say astronaut, and then B for baker, like everything. And I remember, it's quite funny now. I remember seeing window dresser and thinking, "Wow, what's a window dresser?" Um, but there were 3 things I decided on. One was a nun because I was raised Catholic, but then I turned my back on Catholicism when I was 17, but, I had nun, I had the army, and I had a teacher, which makes me laugh so much. They were and a window dresser. They were the 4 things that I'd picked. And when you think about it, what do I do now? I mentor and teach people. Spirituality and intuition is a huge part of me, so I think that's what the nun was about. I was tuning into that. The army was about the discipline, the planning, the understanding how important it is to look after yourself, teamwork. So even though the military is a negative thing for me, how they operate is quite extraordinary. And the window dresser, well, I did run a retail store for 20 years, so perhaps that was that. It's always interesting to look at what games you play as a child, because in there is the secret to what you will do.
If you start in the early days, something that you're passionate about, it's there's a huge potential of turning it into career, really.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you have to be very persistent, and not everyone is in a way.
yeah,
The younger generations are presented with a lot of opportunities today, especially because of the technology. We can work remotely and we can do
yeah,
a lot of jobs that maybe back in the days you would have thought it's impossible or you shouldn't be pursuing them because they wouldn't bring you any money. It was that kind of mentality. You have to have a very good education and pursue a job that is stable for life. Let's put it this way. And I think a lot of younger people struggling today with choosing a career path or profession because there's so many opportunities, but at the same time, with what we are presented online, especially, it influences us in many ways that you have to be rich, good looking in order to be successful. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to shoot for the stars,
yeah,
but not everyone can achieve it because it's hard. You have to be very strong minded and persistent.
yeah,
What
yeah.
career advice would you give to someone wanting to start in a field like yourself or maybe something else? Yeah, what would I
My career advice is this: you have to do what is true to you. So, you know yourself, Matt. You meet some people and they're like really organized. They're always planning things, they're always looking to the future. And then other people are like, I'm just living day by day. And society has often judged which you are. But if you're the kind of person that lives in the moment, and that's who I was, trust that. Really trust that, because when you're that kind of person, the next step always leads to the next step. And there's always a reason for everything that happens. And you need to be true that that is how you live your life. So you do not need to aspire to a goal to have a good career and a good life. You just need to trust the next thing that feels good. So if you're that kind of person, I just want to give you the confidence to say, just do this because it feels good. There's things to learn. It will all make sense later. So now when I run businesses and do marketing and strategy, that's why I did a video course. That's why I worked in radio. That's why I went traveling. Like, to the outside world, it didn't make sense. But to me, I always trusted every step. So just trust yourself. You mentioned these images of success online, and I think a lot of them are really toxic. We need less of these images of people being rich and being on yachts. It's not healthy. What we need is people talking about love and satisfaction and care and community and collaboration. So find a role model And for me, back in the day, it was Anita Roddick. She started the Body Shop, and she was my role model because she showed me that you could care about business, you could do good business, and you could care. Human rights was could be included in business. So find someone, even if it's your neighbor. You do not have to have anyone fancy. Find someone that just seems to make sense to you, and get ask advice. Listen, read books, listen to podcasts. But if it doesn't feel good, stop doing it because we all have this inner guide. And if you trust that guide, even when it doesn't make sense to the world, you will always take the right step.
So it's all about intuition, as on your
It's all
TEDx
about
talk then.
intuition. Yeah.
All right. And what do you think is the biggest challenge facing younger generations today, and how they can overcome it? Do you have any tips, maybe?
Yeah. I think they face the same challenges every young generation has faced. And I know it doesn't seem like that because every generation thinks they have it worse. So when I was a young person, it was nuclear disarmament. We were marching for world peace because we were scared the world was going to blow itself up. Now, everyone's forgotten that. And now we're in this awful time of will there be a future, the climate crisis, the complexity of technology, the poly crisis is what it's called. It's the multiple crises. So I know that's what a lot of young people feel is their biggest challenge. But to always know that you were born at this moment because you are the perfect generation to lead us, to be wise, and to deal with this. So even when it gets overwhelming, trust that you were born at this moment for a reason and you have a role to play.
Okay, thank you very much for this advice. And how have your priorities changed and values over the course of your life?
Yeah, interesting. I think there's some fundamental values. Like I told you about that moment when I was 17, when I discovered the world was different. Moments like that, you develop new sets of values for sure around how I thought about caring for people became very different. So I think every time and then when I became a mother, new values came in. So I think everyone starts out with a couple of values when they're young. Like it could be as simple as kindness and caring. They're two fabulous values. It could be sociability. But as you get older, it's like it's like a gatherer. You gather new values based on your experiences. Um, and I think one of the what's really interesting is as you get older, you keep thinking you're going to learn more. But actually, the beauty of getting older is you realize you've got to learn less. Yeah, and the more yeah, it's quite funny. Um, so I guess your values change as situations occur, but the fundamental me is the same, which is someone who is excited about the world, who cares about the world, who feels like I know what right and wrong means, um, who I probably prioritize love a lot more now than I ever did, though. Love is probably my key value now.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Hopefully, there is going to be more of that. As I said, people are trying to see more differences between each other than finding common grounds, but hopefully,
Mm,
this will
mm,
change over the course. What's a habit that had a positive impact on your life, and how did you develop it? I think it's a very important question because
yeah,
it's also kind of correlated to how you pursue a career, maybe life or profession.
mm,
And
yeah,
habits is something that you need to learn and teach yourself. And not everyone is strong minded, but maybe you have a
yeah.
tip and you can share yours.
Yeah, thank you. My habit was spending time in nature. So, very in my early years, my parents would take me camping. When I became an adult, I'd go camping, and I sought out longer and longer time in nature. So it was like 1 day, 2 days, 4 days, 5 days, 10 days, you know. And this has been the foundation of my life is my connection with nature. So again, what I did was I found out what felt good, and I did a lot of that. Um, I think health is number one, and if you want to be a good contributor to the world, you have to have good health. So you have to make decisions about what you eat, and you have to exercise every day, even if it's a short walk. If you don't have physical health and good mental health, everything else we've talked about today doesn't matter. So you have to find a habit for good mental and physical health.
Yeah, I think we all need more of that because we spend too much time in front of the computers and technology, less time outside. When I spoke with other people, times back in the days, people used to go out more, no phone calls, just turn up and yeah, meet up, and that was it.
Yeah.
Now it's all about making appointments, time, and
Yeah.
then yeah, having the strength of really pursuing that in a way.
Yes. Yes. True. Very true. But then you have to remember in those days, we used to, oh, the phone was ringing all the time. It would drive you mad. Oh, and then we had answering machines, so every technology, if there's too much of it over the decades, you can see we've all developed ways to cope with it. It's like, oh, people used to knock on my door. It would drive me mad. I just pretend I wasn't home sometimes. So, I think it's not just technology. I think whenever there's too much of something, we've always developed coping mechanisms. Um, but what we have to do now is set our alarms, yeah, to make sure we get up every hour. That's what we have to do. We have to make sure we stand up. And all you have to do is shake. I always think you just have to shake your body. And it has, if you shake your body for 30 seconds, you'll feel incredible. You feel this buzz. It's helped your muscles move. It's helped the blood rush around your body, and it's just 30 seconds of shaking. Try it.
You mentioned about your childhood memories, the first kiss and holding hands is something dear and that you remember. But what about relationships? Whether this would be professional, family, friends, or romantic partners, what's the most important lesson you've learned about them?
Oh wow. Okay. Always, always make sure the other person feels heard before you speak, because people are open to hearing you when they feel heard. That is my number one tip.
Okay, wonderful. I think there are different challenges and difficult times for younger people today, even though a lot of things are easier
Mm,
through technology, we can say, but we're not really like taught either in school, or maybe not every family or parents teach the kids how to deal with difficult times in your life. And
yeah.
it's quite hard and challenging because we've got a lot of depressions and other mental illnesses amongst the younger and also
Mm,
the older people. What advice would you give to someone going through tough times, and how did you maybe cope with difficult times in your life?
yeah. Well, I had a terrible period of depression, really bad. And so I know this question well. And one of the most profound pieces of advice I had, and I didn't get a lot because I spent a lot of time by myself, um, was sometimes depression is also a period of deep rest. And I truly believe that if you have a mental health issue, whether it's depression or anxiety, there's a reason. And the first thing is, it's okay. And sometimes it's a really normal human reaction to a really awful situation, whether it's the whole world's no good, or whether it's my family's no good, or whether it's my friends don't understand me, or everyone tells me I need a job and money, but I can't face looking for a job. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a reason, and I do believe that life will always stop you, and depression's the worst version of it, but life will stop you if you are on the wrong track. This is my personal belief. So it's, the bigger the problem in your life, the bigger the gift. So there is a gift in the reason you are having a hard time. And your job is to rest and meditate. The most powerful thing is meditation. You asked me before about habits. Meditation when you are depressed is the number one work. And because sometimes it's all you can do because you can't move and you have to lie there and you can't face people. So using technology, accessing meditations. And then when you feel ready, and not before you feel ready, you ask yourself, what is the gift in this crisis? What is the lesson? What do I have to learn from being this ill? Whether it's physical illness or mental illness, there's often a reason, and there's a gift there. And if you unwrap that gift really slowly, you will come out the other side an even better version of yourself than you can ever imagine.
That's some powerful advice here. Very interesting. In a way, I can relate. I did have some challenging times in my life as well, and always stressed about those situations at the current
Mm,
time. But then at the end of the tunnel, there was always light, and it,
mm,
I agree. There's a gift always waiting for you. It makes you stronger in a way, but you have to keep
yeah,
positive and get up and be strong and not give up. And sometimes people don't have that mental strength, but it would be always good to have someone who can maybe pick you up and help you in those moments. And
yeah.
yeah,
But sometimes when you're depressed, you can't cope with people. You want to be alone, and that's where meditation is your powerful healer. Um, and there's lots of free meditations all over the internet you can use. Um, and another way to spell depressed is deep rest. And it's what our world needs more than anything right now. And to know it's not all your fault because, we have destroyed nature. And as we destroy nature, we have destroyed ourselves. And one of the big realizations of this period in history is if we heal nature and restore nature, that is how we will restore ourselves.
wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing this. Everyone has a different answer to this, but I always like to ask a question. What do you think is the key to a successful and fulfilling life?
To follow your instinct, even when that means you might have to leave people, or people criticize you, or people judge you. If you really know something is true and the right path for you, take that next step. Because even if it feels uncomfortable, if you know it's right, it will always lead you to your destiny. And that's how you have a fulfilling life. And to love people along the way, be with good people. If people are nasty, just turn your back on them. You don't need that in your life. Surround yourself with good people.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. What's a piece of advice you've received that stuck with you throughout your life and why?
There is a way, and I will find it. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite sayings. When I'm stuck and I don't know my way through, or how do I get out of something, or I just say, "There is a way, and I will find it." And because in that moment, it's a statement of belief in myself. So that is one of my favorites. Another one is nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you're sitting around thinking, I want something to be better, and then you still go and watch Netflix all day, and you wake up, but I want a better life, and then you watch Netflix all day. And you wake up again, but I want a better life, and then you eat junk food and watch Netflix. Well, something has to change. You have to change something. So instead of watching Netflix that day, go for a walk. And it can be that simple. Just have to change something, and your inner self goes, oh, we are going to do things differently now. Okay, great. So nothing changes if nothing changes. You can't wish, you must take action.
Okay, wonderful. Let's talk about books. I always like to pick people's brain and talk about books they've read in their life and they would recommend to other people. Yourself are a writer. Are there any books you've written or any books you've read that you would recommend and say you must read them? They are definitely influential and
Yeah,
worthwhile your time.
yeah. So many. Oh my goodness. Okay, two of them come to mind. The first one, because I read it the other day and I hadn't read it for 30 years. It's called The Alchemist. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I've read it.
Yeah, very famous book. And I really loved reading it again. I was like, yeah, this is one of those amazing books that everyone should read. Um, the other book, which I think is a game changer, is by Elizabeth Gilbert, and it's called Big Magic. And you might think at first that it's a book written for writers, but it's a book written for everybody, and it's about creativity and how thoughts come into our minds and what we do with them, and how the world manifests and how ideas and creativity unfold. It's an extraordinary book. I would call it a personal development book, even though she didn't set out to do that. Are you familiar with that one, Matt?
No, not this one.
Yeah, so Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And the third book I might mention is a book by an extraordinary woman called Diana Beresford Kruger. Now, she's amazing because she's probably must be 70 or 80 now, but she has that book. She talks about her extraordinary life, and she was one of the very significant scientists of our times who realized that trees had feelings and trees were sentient beings, and she proved it. And it has informed so much of what we think now about the mycelium network with mushrooms, how we are all interconnected, how we are connected with nature, how it affects our physical and mental health. But the reason it's such an easy, beautiful book to read is because she begins with her journey as a young girl, being brought up in Ireland, and she ends up living in Canada. But she's orphaned. She explains very early young how she's orphaned. And at that time, in the 1950s, 1960s, if you were an orphan in Ireland, you would end up in a really terrible, these factories. But she had a photographic memory, and that saved her. So she was taught all the Celtic wisdom, how trees and landscape operates. And then later on, when she became a scientist, she discovered that all the Celtic wisdom matched the scientific evidence. And she has been influential in how we all think now. And yet, very few people know about her. But she's been very influential in how we understand our relationship to nature. It's an extraordinary book, very easy to read, an absolute pleasure to read or listen to. And yeah, so it's called I Speak for the Trees, I think it's called. Yeah, no, To Speak for the Trees. And it's Dr. Diana Beresford Kroger. Mm.
Okay, I will definitely pick that one up for sure. What's something you're excited for the future, whether this is for yourself or the world?
Mm. Okay, I'm excited about the restoration of nature and the creation of communities that are different to how we live now. So the we've been brought up in a world where it's all about the individual, and it's what you to get ahead, you've got to do this, and you can leave other people behind. I think we live in different times now. It's like, how do we bring everyone with us? How do we create communities, like-minded communities, and yet still express our uniqueness in the world? So at some point we got mixed up and we muddled up being unique and being an individual. Um, so I'm very excited about together people restoring nature and building communities together. So things like eco villages and co-housing, it's being expressed in many different ways, but people creating new ways to live and be because they're modeling the future, how we will survive and how we will thrive.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And do you think the society could do something better to support younger people these days?
Yeah, get rid of schools. No, I'm joking, but I'm not really joking. I think you've heard of forest schools, yeah? Do you have those? Yeah. So I think the way we can support young people is to bring this concept of spending time in nature and building, understanding how food is grown. And in Germany, it was the Steiner, it was anthroposophy, it was this Rudolf Steiner method that spread out all over the world. So it's that kind of idea where we learn very practical skills, and we understand our connection back to the earth. So instead of going to a supermarket and buying food in a can, we learn that you grow food, and that's more nutritious. It's better for our physical health and our mental health. Um, and just supporting young people to say, it's okay if you don't want to go to school. If you don't fit at school, we're going to provide some alternative ways for you to learn and grow as a human, and support you to being an adult. So, yeah, but the education system's very rigid. It doesn't serve young people, um, but there are some really amazing examples of alternative education, and we need to grow them.
I couldn't agree more. I think the schooling system is not preparing people for life at all, in my opinion. I think it's very important to have the general knowledge of things because, yes, we need it. It's very important. But at the same time, I completely agree. It's not preparing us for things, how to manage our money, how to deal with emotions, how to go for interviews, how to interact with people, perhaps how to source different things that we in need of at different times of our life. And I think it has to be altered massively. And especially, I think it's very disappointing to see in countries like America that people have to spend a fortune to go to a university, have a fraction of a chance landing a job that would basically help them pay the debt off very quickly and still sustain a life that is making them happy. Because we finish universities in countries like America and we start our life with debts. And I think education should be free. And also, it should be altered based on personas. Maybe I've seen some sci-fi movies in the past where they kind of put kids in different groups and they would be learning different areas because they would fit in those areas, whether this would be mentally or physically, and kind of creating those groups they would fit the best of, and then kind of end up in the unknown, not knowing what we should do with our life, career, and we get inspired on the internet, and that's not necessarily the right direction to go for because not everyone can
Mm.
become, for example, a millionaire because it takes a lot of strength and dedication, and not everyone is aware of this. And there's not like a blue pill when I spoke to someone else who mentioned that or called it that way that can make you a millionaire or successful overnight. It's not working like this. And yeah,
Yeah,
mm,
and it also
I
depends why you
change
want money. Like, I mean, money, being a millionaire, so what if you're doing bad things for the world?
yeah. But I think that also make you happy and doesn't give you any teaches you any values in most cases.
Yeah,
Because you can have accumulate as much material as possible and it still won't make you happy. We've seen it over and
that's
over
true.
again with Hollywood
That's true,
stars,
but money makes
billionaires,
life
and
easier.
yeah. Okay, let's go to the final question. What would be your final words of wisdom that you would want to pass on to the younger generations? Anything that you've covered or maybe not covered in the interview and you think it would be worthwhile passing on and mentioning?
You know, it's really interesting, but there's a very powerful um, poem written by a woman called Marianne Williamson, and I think she summarizes what I would want to say wisely. And the poem was actually spoken by Nelson Mandela in his inauguration speech. So you can look that up as well. But let me just get that for you because I don't think you could get anything more powerful than this. And it says, there's one particular line. I won't read the whole poem, but there's one particular line, and it says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens up." We have to ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, and talented? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God, and you playing small does not serve this world. So that would be my final line. You playing small does not serve this world. Be the best version of yourself. Even if you are a cleaner, be the best cleaner there is. Talk to people, help people, and clean beautifully. If you are a teacher, to care beautifully. Be the best teacher you can be. If you are the president, be the best president you can be. It doesn't matter what your status in life is, but do not play small. Be the best version of yourself. Love the best, care the best, eat the best, think the best. Because until you do it in a way that's personal to you, the best version of yourself, you are always going to be unsatisfied. You will feel unfulfilled. So it's not what you do. You can have the smallest house and the smallest job, but you can be the happiest if you are true to yourself. So don't play small. Go learn something new. Get out there and meet people.
That's a powerful ending and very powerful words of wisdom. Janine, I wanted to really thank you from my whole heart for investing your time. I think this is the biggest currency someone can give these days. Thank you
Mm.
very much for sharing the stories, wisdom, and knowledge. And yeah, making the time to be here present. And it means a lot to me. It's absolutely incredible. And I'm very grateful for you being with me here today. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, thank you, Matt. And you are modeling everything we've just talked about. You are just doing what feels good to you, and you're giving to people, and you're learning skills, and you're amazing. So thank you from my heart to yours.